Bored playing an Ace Combat game like this? Well, my missiles aren't tracking even though I'm like can. Well, this game sucks. It won't let me use bombs on targets. Would you much rather be able to learn how to play like this? Then look no further. Welcome to Ace Combat 101, an initiative aimed at those new to Bandai Namco's arcade flight shooter series. Whether you've played none of the games before, or are rusty after a few years of going cold turkey, this mini-series will be just the thing for you in learning how to fly, read your heads-up display, shoot down enemies efficiently, and think more like a pilot. My name is Tomcat171, and I wish to welcome you to the first video in a multi-part video and article collaboration between myself, Ace Combat Fan, and the team at Project Lighthouse. In these video tutorials, Ace Combat Fan and I will be taking you under our wings to build you into a formidable ace. From plane handling to air-to-ground combat tactics, we'll show you how to fly like this, in no time. But don't start counting your kills just yet. We have a lot to cover. We will both be using Ace Combat 6 Fires of Liberation as the foundation for our demonstrations, but the same practice can apply across any Ace Combat game you currently own or intend to purchase in future, including Ace Combat 7. In this first part, I'll be teaching you the basics of the Ace Combat flight model, some traditional aircraft maneuvers, and how to improve your low-level flying. Ace Combat Fan will be bringing you part 2, which will look at the use of weaponry. Here's a list of chapters you can expect in this video. So if there are topics with which you are already familiar, then click on the relevant timestamp in the description to find out what you need to know. Before we get going, I must lay down one very important disclaimer. Ace Combat is not a simulator. It never has been, and it never will be. DCS and Falcon BMS are simulators. If you go into Ace Combat believing it to be one of the latter, you will be disappointed. Ace Combat is meant to take the flight genre and make it more accessible to those who do not have the patience to browse through a 500-page document on how to use TACAN and intercept an ILS localizer. With that out of the way, let's get started. If this is the first time you're experiencing a flying game like this and have come from the more popular, down-to-earth genres like FPSs and racing games, then there are two important facts you must remember before even getting into a plane. Traditionally, the only way to stop an aircraft's motion is when it has landed. In most other games, the player has the ability to bring their character to a dead stop at any time to take stock of a situation. In the most basic terms, planes maintain lift because air is always passing over its wings at high speed. If the airflow stops, the plane falls out the sky. The only part of a plane's forward motion that is in your control is how quickly it happens. Using the air brakes will slow down an aircraft, but not enough to bring it to a complete stop. Like the first-person shooters and racing games mentioned earlier, most modern games only fully utilise two-dimensional axes for motion, the side-by-side lateral axis, and the backwards to forwards longitudinal axis. In Ace Combat, the third vertical axis is a very important part of navigating with your plane. Not only must you be aware of what's in front, behind and to the sides of you, but also what is above and below. But as you're about to find out, sometimes up can become right, right can become the ground, and down can be in front of you. In order to efficiently fly around the map, it helps to understand some basic instrumentation that will help you know where and how you are positioned within it. I have here an F-16C Fighting Falcon, and I'll use it to demonstrate. For now, the control layout is set to what is called Normal in Ace Combat 6, but for Ace Combat 7 has been renamed to Expert. In the first person camera view, you will find a heads-up display, or HUD, littered with what might first appear like jumbled arithmetic. We won't be looking at the weapons today, and the only thing you need to know about the radar for now is that the radar map will show you exactly where you are and what direction you're facing. For now, just keep your attention on the square formation of readouts around the centre of the screen. Don't worry, I'll help decipher it for you. Left of centre is your current airspeed. The unit can be changed between kilometers per hour and knots in the options menu, depending on player choice. At the moment, the aircraft is at cruising speed, with the throttle at idle, and flying level. Watch what happens when I kick in the afterburner. And then activate the air brake to come back to cruising speed. It's just like accelerating and braking in a car. Nothing to it. To the right is your altitude. Similar to airspeed, the unit of measurement can be changed depending on player choice, this time between feet and meters. Let's raise and dip the nose and see what happens. As you climb, your altitude increases, and vice versa when in a dive. Just above centre is a compass showing a 3-digit number. This is your heading in radial degrees from 000 to 359. 000 is north, 090 is east, 180 is south, and 270 is west. The number will keep changing depending on the direction you choose to face. Let's turn around and see it in action. If, for example, you are told an enemy is at bearing 135, they are southeast of your position. In the middle, you might notice a thin ladder-like overlay with rungs both ascending and descending in multiples of 5. This indicates the current angle of pitch relative to the horizon. Solid lines mean the aircraft is ascending, broken lines mean it is descending. The ladder also acts as an artificial horizon, remaining completely level with the ground at all times. This can be used to ascertain the aircraft's current attitude and roll angle. Finally, you may have noticed two icons right in the centre of the screen. One has remained perfectly still, while the other tends to wobble during flight. The large W-shaped icon, or whiskey marker, is fixed, and tells you where the aircraft's nose is currently pointing. If you have this icon pointing towards the ground, for example, and don't adjust your heading, you will crash. The second marker is your velocity indicator. It continually calculates and predicts the flight path of your aircraft based on its level of bank, pitch, and speed. For example, if I were to reduce the throttle with the nose up, you will notice that the whiskey marker remains pointed skyward, but the velocity indicator is hovering below it. This means that while the aircraft is nose up, it will continue to fly level because of the low throttle input. If I were to invert, let gravity take hold of the aircraft and not counter it with negative pitch, the indicator will move towards the ground. Speed, altitude, heading, attitude, and flight path. These are the most important things to keep an eye on when first getting used to flying. Bear in mind that the pitch ladder and whiskey marker are only viewable in the two first-person cameras. They are removed in order to declutter the interface when in third-person view. Should you ever become disoriented and unsure of where to go, you can activate the left and right rudders simultaneously to initiate autopilot and bring the aircraft back to level flight. Anticipation and reading the space in front of you will help massively. If you use predictive thinking to analyse where your plane is currently going and compare it to where you want it to go, you'll be able to correct before trouble strikes. It's better to think 2 or 3 moves ahead in order to not get caught out. Remember those 3 axes I mentioned earlier? Let's look at them in greater detail. Imagine they're all centred on the aircraft, each one indicating a plane around which the aircraft can rotate. The lateral axis runs from left to right from wingtip to wingtip. The elevators at the rear of the aircraft redirect the airflow over them, forcing the tail up or down and the nose the opposite way using the lateral axis as a fulcrum, creating pitch. Pitch is how an aircraft will typically change its altitude, and is operated by moving the analog stick up and down. The vertical axis, commonly known as yaw, runs from under the aircraft, through its centre, and up through the top. Using the rudder on the vertical stabiliser will force the tail section one direction and the nose another, rotating it along this axis. Yaw is best used for making fine-tune adjustments for things such as heading and aiming the gun. Finally, the longitudinal axis goes all the way along the centreline of the aircraft from nose to tail, intersecting the other 2 axes at a single point. When moving the analog stick in one direction, the ailerons on both wings will move in opposite directions, redirecting the airflow over them and forcing the body of the aircraft to rotate around this axis. This motion is called roll. When combined, all 3 will allow for fluid navigation of any space, be it open-air aerobatics or narrow spaces, like flying between skyscrapers.
Do a barrel roll!
Thanks for that, Peppy, but that wasn't a barrel roll. I'll come back to that a little bit later. Ace Combat games typically come with 2 control layouts, one for novice players that wish to learn the ropes, and one for those comfortable with being upside down. For transparency's sake, I will demonstrate how the novice control scheme works, but the main focus on this video is to introduce new players to using an aircraft's full range of motion with the normal or expert setting. The novice control layout completely removes the need for the vertical or yaw axis when turning left and right, with the function of the roll axis also extremely limited. To turn, the plane will lightly bank in whichever direction indicated by the player, and turn with a motion very similar to a car. The aircraft can still use the rudder for fine left-right tuning when in level flight, but it is disabled while mid-turn to avoid confusing the player. The pitch is the only axis with all of its freedom still intact. Full and half loops can be easily pulled off by holding the stick down. When inverted, however, the aircraft will automatically level itself. As you've seen, the novice control scheme is definitely the best way to integrate yourself into the basics of flight if you have no prior experience. The stick down. When inverted, however, the aircraft will automatically level itself. As you've seen, the novice control scheme is definitely the best way to integrate yourself into the basics of flight if you have no prior experience. However, control of the aircraft is limited, meaning the ability to maneuver to the fullest extent is hindered, and, to a degree, so is the experience of gameplay. Despite its steeper learning curve, I would always recommend that a transition to the expert control type be made as soon as possible, for with practice comes proficiency. So by now you should have a grasp of understanding the space around you, the ways your plane can move, and why the normal or expert control scheme provides greater freedom of movement. So now that you know this, you can just jump into an A-10 and throw down in a massive dogfight, right? Just like the saying, every dog has its day, every plane has its perks. No two aircraft in Ace Combat will handle the same despite the arcade-like flying model, so as well as being able to fluidly fly in the space around you, it's also important to get to grips with how different planes will act within it. Aircraft in Ace Combat are given numerous statistical values that determine how they handle. For most Ace Combat titles, there are 6 stats in total: speed, mobility, stability, defense, air-to-air, and air-to-ground. In this video, we only need to look at 3 of them. The speed stat indicates how badly your plane will disintegrate when you crash. The speed stat speaks for itself, quantifying not only the top speed of the aircraft, but also its rate of acceleration. Here's a drag race between an F-15E with a high speed rating and a slow speed F-117. The footage is at double speed. Not only does the F-15 have a higher top speed, it also reaches it much quicker than the Nighthawk can get to its own. The Nighthawk in this case is so slow that it hadn't even reached its top speed by the time I stopped recording the Eagle. For missions where enemies are spread across the map, a faster aircraft is recommended, whereas for missions that involve tightly packed groups, sometimes having a slower aircraft means more targets can be destroyed in a single attack run instead of being forced to overshoot and having to turn around. An aircraft's mobility relates to how quickly it can roll, pitch, and yaw, but a plane with high mobility doesn't necessarily mean it's good at all 3. For example, this F-15 has good roll and pitch, but the rudders aren't all there. On the A-10, however, it doesn't pitch too well, but the rudders are some of the most powerful. Don't go thinking that the highest tiered aircraft will always be the most nimble. Looks like we need another race. On the left is the best aircraft in Ace Combat 6, with a low mobility DLC skin. On the right, a mid-tier Rafale with a high mobility skin. One full turn to the right, go! Low mobility aircraft are better utilised in air-to-ground operations as their course is easier to fine-tune. High mobility aircraft are much better suited for air-to-air combat due to their ability to outrun and outturn enemies. It's all well and good having a plane that can turn on a dime and go faster than a speeding bullet, but it won't amount to much if it's as unpredictable as Shia LaBeouf's next publicity stunt, will it? That's where stability matters. It informs a player as to how well or badly the aircraft will respond to control inputs, as well as how it handles low speeds. In an aircraft with high stability, the roll and pitch will respond as asked by the controller without oversensitivity or twitchiness. Aircraft with low stability have a tendency to fight back against the player, and can also be more susceptible to stalling when pulling high G turns. Let's compare two of the most extreme cases to highlight the point. These two DLC skins have both the best and worst stability ratings for aircraft in Ace Combat 6. When I roll the Hornet on the bottom, it will only move as much as has been demanded by the player, with no extra inertia acting on the airframe. The F-16 at the top, however, is so unstable that it will continue to roll even when there is no input from the controller. Bear in mind these are two extreme cases. Most normal aircraft will have a smaller margin for instability, but enough for a player to notice. Now that we know everything there is about aircraft handling, let's have a look at how we can put this learning into practice. I feel like upgrading our plane, don't you? Now let's assume that you've just moved from novice controls to normal or expert. But now that every part of the plane is under your control, you're worried you will immediately start flat spinning like Maverick did in Top Gun. As stated before, Ace Combat is anything but a simulator. You can throw your plane into ridiculous 10G turns and the plane won't lose control, the pilot won't black out, and the wings won't suddenly snap off. Realism is not what matters in Ace Combat. What does matter is feeling like you're the most badass fighter pilot that the strange real world has ever seen. This time, we're in a Sukhoi Su-33. It's more agile than the Falcon in all aspects, and a good platform to show off some quick moves. In the novice controls, the plane was simply turning because you tilted the analog stick left or right. Turning with the normal or expert controls is just as simple, and it's done in two stages. When you've decided in which direction you would like to turn, simply roll the aircraft so the top of the fuselage is facing that direction, then just pull up as if you were performing a loop. The best part of turning this way is that you can use as much or as little roll as possible. You can remain parallel to the ground, or you could make your plane arc up and then down in one motion. The possibilities are endless. As an added perk, the rudder is fully open for use while turning, unlike when using the novice scheme. In the majority of cases, and especially when compared to high G, your plane will pitch up faster than it can pitch down. Negative pitch should only be used to fine-tune your attitude or your aim. For the next few manoeuvres, I'll be using these runways as a reference point so that you can see just how the plane's direction changes before and after each is performed. The loop is always the best place to start, and can be performed with novice controls just as well as it can with expert. All you have to do is pull the stick back, allow your plane to pass through the vertical, go inverted, then descend and level out on the same course you had upon starting. This move is best used when trying to get an enemy off your tail without ultimately changing course or altitude. It's like performing a turn, but upward. I'll also be demonstrating each manoeuvre on this flight of 4 C-17 Globemasters. They're behind me at this point in time, so I can't shoot at them. To get behind them, all I need to do is pull back the stick, let them overshoot me, come all the way past the vertical again, and level out behind them. Now, I can hit them all at the same time. Slow-moving aircraft like C-17s and bombers are an easy target to practice with, but the same principle applies to fighters and ground targets as well should you ever overshoot them. Let's assume you've cleared out some priority targets at low level, but there's a straggling aircraft above that you missed. You could immediately climb up to meet them and then end up wasting a few extra seconds getting tangled up, or you could be a bit more methodical and use the Immelmann turn. The Immelmann turn is extremely easy to grasp. Start off as if you were performing a standard loop, but once you're inverted and facing the opposite direction, roll back out to level flight. The Immelman turn is a great way to quickly change direction and increase your altitude. Because the plane is fighting against gravity during the climb, your airspeed will drop, so make sure to add a bit of throttle to avoid a stall. Here we are at the C-17s again. I'm here at low altitude, with the Globemasters above me and travelling the opposite direction. My plan is to pop up behind them once they've passed and take them all out in one fell swoop. Using the radar, I'll determine when they've passed directly over me, and pull up. Now I'll level off and unleash hell. The split S, in its simplest terms, is an Immelman turn in reverse, where you start the move at high altitude and end it low. The only part of the technique that changes is that the half roll is performed at the start of the manoeuvre, and then the stick is pulled back. Gravity will pull the aircraft down, so be sure to have the air brake ready if you begin a split S close to the ground. Let's go after those poor C-17s one last time. Wait for them to pass beneath, invert and begin to descend, level out, and turn them to scrap. The aileron roll has the reputation of being mistaken for a barrel roll among the uninitiated. In matter of fact, the aileron roll has little to no effective use in combat, as the aircraft is not changing course, altitude, or speed, and is more of a flashy move shown off during air shows. In its basic form, the aileron roll is performed simply by putting the aircraft through one full roll to either the left or right. If any benefit of performing an aileron roll can be plucked from thin air, other than it looking cool, it would be that it helps to evade machine gun fire. Missiles, not so much. The actual barrel roll is like an aileron roll, but it can actually be of use in a dogfight. It adds the use of pitch to make it look like the aircraft is rolling around the inside of a barrel, hence the name. The best way to practice performing a barrel roll is to have something to mark the point around which to pivot, like a bridge. Think of the barrel roll as part loop and part aileron roll, with stick both down and to the side in equal measure. If practicing with a landmark, you want the aircraft to be inverted just as you're passing over it. Stop pulling up once the roll has been completed to level out. You'll now find you're on the other side of the landmark. It's a tricky move to grasp from the start, but with practice you'll get it in no time. Performing a barrel roll maintains course, altitude and speed much like an aileron roll, but the aircraft's lateral position has been shifted to either the left or right. Unlike the aileron roll, this will help somewhat in evading missiles that are close behind. Ace Combat 6 introduced a new manoeuvring feature that has since been adopted as standard. Turning by just pulling up is the typical way of doing things. But what if you had a missile on your tail, and just pulling up won't get rid of it? That's where the high G turn could save you. The high G turn will make an aircraft pitch at a much faster rate, but at the expense of much faster loss of airspeed. Keep an eye on your speed when performing a high G turn, because otherwise you might stall before escaping danger, and leave yourself a sitting duck. In Ace Combat 6, high G turns are activated by pressing the throttle and air brake simultaneously while turning. In Ace Combat Assault Horizon, it was done by holding just the air brake while turning. In Ace Combat 7, both options are available to the player and can be selected in the options menu. That's it for the bare basics of combat maneuvering. After a little bit of practice, you'll be able to combine all of these moves together and flow like water through any open combat area. But what if we narrowed the margin for error? What if we made it so that your maneuvering space is limited? The concept of going Mach 2 under 500 feet while upside down, flying on the complete edge of control and then making a fool of yourself by crashing is one of the greatest discouragements to new players, but at the same time can provide some of the greatest testaments to your skill if pulled off. Low-level maneuvers aren't as complex to grasp as some might believe. It's all a matter of how far you're willing to stretch your comfort zone. As I demonstrated in the earlier chapters, gravity is very loosely simulated in Ace Combat, and the greatest risk of this is at low altitude. Inverting and not providing counter input will put you in the ground quicker than you can say, "Oh crap!" So start off slow and steady. First get used to travelling at a manageable speed in an open area, then simply roll the plane from side to side, pausing every so often to see how it reacts, and using the velocity indicator to determine where the craft wants to go at certain levels of bank. Once comfortable, mix it up a bit. Try flying around obstacles. Try flying level and performing one full roll without stopping. The plane will descend slightly, but not enough to put you in danger. This will help you get used to the feeling of being inverted even for a few fractions of a second. After that, move on to an area a little more constrictive, like a mountain range. In the bottom of the valleys, there's nowhere to go but forward. Use these long corridors to practice using the rudder and small levels of roll to correct your course. And if you really feel up for it, try a narrow and winding ravine. Not only will you get used to fine course correction, you will also get acquainted with performing quick and heavy changes in direction. Again, start slow at first, but start picking up the pace if things get too easy. Finally, for the ultimate test, try a tunnel, where any false moves are made at one's peril. Slow and steady wins the race, but if you want to feel like Lando Calrissian escaping an exploding Death Star, be my guest and gun that afterburner. But while low level and restricted flight can feel great when mastered, it also has one major drawback. You will be more susceptible to ground-based anti-aircraft fire than at medium to high altitudes and open spaces, so be mindful of this when hugging the deck during attack runs. To reiterate one final time, Ace Combat is not a simulator. So when it comes to getting back on the ground, you don't need to get permission to land from air traffic control, you don't need to find a radial, and you definitely don't need to worry about your glide slope. It's as easy as 1, 2, 3 wheels on the ground. For both base and carrier landings, an ILS marker will appear in the centre of the HUD. When approaching, you want to make sure that both the vertical and horizontal guidelines are intersecting one another in the centre. If the horizontal guideline is below centre, you need to lower your altitude. If it's above centre, be sure to climb. The vertical guideline indicates lateral deviation from the centre of the runway. If the guideline is to the right, bring your plane back to the right. If it's to the left, bring the plane left. Once centred, apply the air brake and allow the plane to glide down to the runway. You can touch down as cleanly or as nastily as you like, just as long as you do it on the runway and not the taxiway. Or the apron. If you want that extra little look and feel of realism, you can feather the throttle to raise the nose and place the velocity indicator along the runway. This will make your landing look smoother and more like reality. Ultimately, the choice is up to you. In Ace Combat 6, you're able to land on runways that have been captured by friendly forces mid-mission, but this function won't be available in Ace Combat 7, so we won't be looking at it. In the real world, landing on an aircraft carrier is said to be one of the most difficult tasks ever. In Ace Combat, it's anything but. The only difference between landing on a carrier and landing on a runway is that the carrier deck is programmed to act as a greater braking force on the aircraft in order to mimic the arresting cables on a catobar ship. Line up the ILS markers the same way you would with a runway, and aim for the aft of the deck. Don't come in too fast though, because you might have a close call. If you feel your angle is off and you won't make it, you can always wave off, circle around, and try again. Don't worry too much about how the landing looks. The LSO won't lambast you for being a little high all the way, slightly overshooting the glide slope at the start, not calling the ball, having too much power in the middle, and settling at the ramp. When departing from either a runway or carrier, the aircraft will already be lined up and ready to go. For runways, simply hold down the afterburner, wait until you're going over 150 knots, then pull back the stick and climb away. Once you pass a certain altitude, the game will take over and place you back into the mission. For carrier departures, the aircraft will be hooked up to a catapult. This time, the plane won't move when you hold the afterburner, but if you wait a few moments, you'll be flung off the bow at speed. As before, Continue to climb until the game takes control away. That about wraps it up for the basics of flying in Ace Combat, and in fact for this first video segment of Ace Combat 101. If you're new to Ace Combat, or are returning after a hiatus and have come across this video, I hope that the information within has been of assistance in understanding the controls and learning how to fly quicker than if you were going into it blindly. This first video segment has been released alongside the first of numerous planned articles written by the Project Lighthouse team. Don't hesitate to check out their website in the description if you're interested in reading up on the history of Ace Combat. For more Ace Combat videos, don't hesitate to subscribe to both myself and Ace Combat Fan, who will be releasing the second part of the Ace Combat 101 video series, which will be looking at the use of weaponry, so keep your eyes peeled for its arrival. I would like to firstly thank you for watching, and also extend thanks to the Project Lighthouse team for allowing me to join this collaborative effort. Stay tuned for future parts, for we have a lot more to show you.